Testing YouTube. All right, here we go. Hey, it is the ASP.NET Community Stand-Up. It is November 18th, post-open sourcing announcement, and we have my boss together. We are the Lesser Scots. How are you, sir?
I'm excellent. How are you? I'm tired
Cool.
actually from last week.
You know, thank you for pointing that out. I would like a day off, if that's cool with you.
Fine with me.
Yes, I got a day off. That's awesome. Yeah, you know, it was 2 weeks of chaos because it was 2 weeks of MVP Summit, and then we went to New York, and I went to Vegas, and then where did you go? You went to Vegas too. And
I only went to New York, but after you left New York, I spent Thursday meeting high-profile customers and Friday with high-profile customers. So I did 10 customer visits on Thursday and Friday.
10.
10.
Oh, wow. Is this like New York customers, like suits? You have to wear a suit?
I did not wear a suit. I did not pack a suit, so there was no way they could make me wear a suit. I was probably the most underdressed in the EBC day.
EBC is the executive briefings, and that's when, you know, we go and talk to, like, I don't know, big giant New York bank, and we are the West Coast contingent. So you in flip-flops and they in suits, I assume.
I wore jeans and a button-up shirt, but it was not the equivalent of Scott Guthrie or Soma or PJ or Julia all walking around, you know, dressed up.
Yeah, it was definitely one of those weekends. Well, it was a 2-week period of exhaustion. I'm totally burnt right now, unfortunately. But we survived, and basically we open-sourced .NET Core. We've made a commitment now to making this stuff run on Linux and Mac. Maybe you could talk about the Linux and Mac stuff, because I think there's a little confusion about what exactly we're committing to doing here.
Yeah, so I think the first thing is we should talk about what .NET Core is. So there's .NET 4.5.2, which is what everybody's running today, or 4.5.2 or 4.5.3 that everybody's running today, and
4.6, I guess, is the next version.
We announced 4.6 today. Hold on one second. We announced 4.6 today, or last week at the meeting, and 4.6 is just the next evolution of the big .NET framework that's installed on copies of Windows. And even though we did announce .NET Core 5, we do have a bunch of improvements going into .NET 4.6 for all of our ASP.NET developers as well. We have things like support for HTTP2 is going into .NET 4.6. We added support for async model binding to web forms. So we just keep adding small incremental things to the product. We have support for the Roslyn compilers throughout all of our technology stacks. If you're using ASP.NET 4.6, that's web forms, MVC, Web API. All technologies can use Roslyn. And so those are the three kind of major investments we made on the .NET 4.6 stack for our customers. We also announced, as you said, .NET Core 5. And what .NET Core 5 is it's a server version of the .NET framework in a lot of ways. It's a great way to describe it today at its current state. That means it doesn't have all the client technologies built into it. So it's got there's no WinForms, there's no WPF. Those big frameworks are not inside of this thing. This thing is designed mainly to run server applications like ASP.NET in the future. So it means we shrunk the CLR down quite a bit. I think when we were playing with it at MVP Summit, if you looked, it was about 15 megs is what a KRE was.
Right. I like to refer to that kind of as a non-threatening size. This is not 250 megs in a reboot.
Right. And so it's a smaller version of the .NET framework, but it's the real .NET framework with the base class libraries. ASP.NET runs on top of it, and that's the version of the .NET framework that we completely open sourced. And we also announced that we were going to have support for Mac and Linux. You're going to be able to run that CLR on Mac and Linux. And not only can you run those things on Mac and Linux, but we're going to fully support and stand by that product as a company. So if you want to go run your ASP.NET application on .NET Core 5 on Ubuntu, and you want to call Microsoft support, we will support you on that.
Now, how is that different? Now, how is it going to relate? Maybe we don't have it all figured out, but there's Mono now, and then there's a future .NET CLR. Are we going to kind of intermingle our work together?
We've been talking to Miguel DeCaza from Xamarin for quite a while about this whole effort, about what do we do in this new world. Mono is an open source implementation of .NET, but it's not as compatible as .NET because the restrictions at the time that they were writing that product was they could not look at the source code for .NET. They couldn't use something like Reflector to go look at the class libraries. They basically had to say, I'm going to read the docs, and we're going to see what these APIs look like, and try to implement them in a white room. And so because of that, it's not as compatible as you would like. And so I think what you're going to end up seeing is, or what I would hope, is we'll see the Mono guys start taking parts of .NET Core 5, merging them in, and maybe at some point .NET Core 5 becomes the base of Mono, and they end up being libraries that live on top of that. And we're talking to Miguel about all those possibilities. But I think the first steps from talking to Miguel would be they might move some of our bits into Mono to make Mono more compatible. But I would hope in the long run we get to a point where there's one base class, base CLR that they're using and that we're using.
I see. So if we think about it, thinking about ASP.NET right now, we're moving to a modular system. We're going to have a modular CLR, and then we're going to NuGet in the packages. Yeah. On the Mono side today, there's the Mono Jitter and the Mono CLR that's not 100% compatible. But an important point about Mono, it lives in other platforms that have nothing to do with Linux or Mac, right? There are other versions of Mono that run on embedded devices and game consoles and just who knows what else.
Exactly. That's why they couldn't just take our CLR today. Is our CLR doesn't run on PlayStation 3s and PlayStation 4s. It doesn't run on Xbox 360s and Xbox Ones. It doesn't work on ARM devices. Obviously, Xamarin is running that version of Mono. They're running it on iOS and Android devices, and so that's
so Mono is bigger than just Linux and Mac. Is the point, I think, right?
I was talking to Miguel. I hope they can actually contribute some of that back to us, and maybe they're the ones that bring the the Xbox support or the PlayStation support to our stack.
Yeah. Okay. So then Mono, there's the desktop CLR. There's the core CLR that will now run in multiple places. We bring our Jitter and CLR, and then there might be .NET Core libraries that are NuGetted in. There might be Mono libraries that are NuGetted in. But ultimately, it's all about pluggability and choice, and regardless of how we decide to fork and/or converge.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. All right, that makes sense. And all of this is going to be done in the open, right? Like people keep saying, like, "What's your plan?" Well, we're working out the plan, but you're going to be able to watch the commits happen as that happens. None of this is happening in secret, I assume.
Yeah, it's supposed to happen pretty soon. I assume they're going to do it very similar to what we did with ASP.NET 5. We worked on ASP.NET 5 for about 3 months internally before we actually put it up on the open source repo. The main reason we did that was it didn't run or do anything for that first 2 or 3 months. And so we actually got it to a point where it barely ran, and that's when we copied it up there. And I assume that the CLR team's going to do something very similar. Just putting a jumble of bits up there that don't compile and don't run doesn't help anybody. But I think as soon as they have something that people can try, that's my understanding is they're going to put it up there. I can say internally, I have not seen that CLR either. So it's not even to a point where the ASP.NET team has had a chance to try it for the first time yet.
Okay, so that means that there's not like a secret hidden CLR we're working on, like internally. This stuff we'll be able to watch the commits if we are interested in watching them happen.
Yeah, I think once they get the first version out there that compiles and runs for the first time, they'll put it up.
You got to get it to build. You're not going to check in something that doesn't build.
Exactly, and that's the same thing we did with ASP.NET 5. We could have checked it in December, but it didn't work.
Right. Okay, let me ask you about this dream that you and I have had for a while, and tell me if this is going to happen. I imagine sometime next year that I'm at a hackathon with a bunch of 15-year-olds, and some of them have $200 Walmart laptops, and some of them have nice Surface Pros, and some have Macs, and some have Ubuntu machines that are Dell, and they're learning Rails and Ruby, and they're learning Node, and some of them are in TextEdit, and some of them are in Sublime. Will I be able to come in there as an ASP.NET person, type something from the command line, some non-threatening apt-get, npm install, download a DMG, I don't know, some 15, 20, 30 meg thing, and have them running ASP.NET web pages in Razor, and they're alongside Node people, and they're all sharing Bower, packages and learning about the web. And now we're basically one of the many open source web frameworks.
Right. To me, that's the most exciting part of the .NET Core stuff. Is it's small enough finally that now, and it doesn't require any admin privileges. So because it doesn't touch registries and GACs and all these things, it just means anybody should be able to pull this thing down, a 15, 20 meg download, and you're off and running ASP.NET applications or .NET applications on the hardware of your choice, whether it be in a Ubuntu box or a Mac or whatever, or a Windows machine. That's the beauty of this thing, is suddenly the acquisition of the stack is not a 1.5 gig download, it's a 15 to 20 meg download, just like Node or PHP is. And so I hope it means that we can introduce our technology to a much wider audience, because we're running on the cross-plat, and our footprint to install is very small and requires no admin privileges.
Yeah, and one of the things I've been saying when people ask me about this is that, how is this different from Node and PHP and Rails? And I think that you need to remember that this is going to have all the kind of the sense of being dynamic that you get on a Node or a PHP, where you make a change to a text file and hit refresh and it comes up, but also all the speed and power that you get out of a static compilation model and you get out of the CLR. So I think we'll see perf benefits that you maybe won't see with some of these other more dynamic frameworks.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, we've been optimizing the jitters and the garbage collectors for 15 years now. So, I mean, this is pretty mature technology that's been load tested for years and years and years and years and years. And, we also have some pretty cool stuff, things like Razor. The Razor syntax was us taking a look at Ruby and taking a look at PHP, taking a look at ASPX, and trying to find a better syntax for, building web with the least amount of code in the page. And so I think people have ported Razor to other languages already. So there's Razor for PHP, there's Razor for Ruby. So I think what we're also going to bring is just going to bring some of the cool innovations that we've done over the years, to the average customer.
Yeah, and I think that things with like where the web is going in general, like web components is going to be one interesting thing, and then also tag helpers, which is kind of like web components for the server, is going to make for a very a surprisingly lightweight syntax for Razor. I think that your average Razor page is going to not even look like much more than HTML, but it'll have a great deal of power behind it.
Yeah, do you have that that example we have that shows what a Razor page looked like before and what it looks like today?
So it's funny. I'm actually, after we get off the phone, my job this morning is a quick sample post, because Damian Edwards took the starter web stuff that we shipped in the preview, converted it to tag helpers, and I'm going to put it up as a side-by-side to give people some idea of what's going on with that.
Yeah, that's if you just go to Damian Edwards' GitHub repository, you can get that. So
yeah. It's pretty ridiculous, actually, and it's just a work in progress. We're still brainstorming, but it's pretty close to what we think it's going to look like.
Yeah, it's pretty compelling. I mean, if you look when you see Scott's blog post later today, even though we think we've been making syntax better, the reality is an ASP.NET page, even with Razor, has lots of C#isms in it, which we get you out of the HTML editor quite a bit. You're writing your attributes in C# versus writing them in HTML, and so it's amazing. It reduces the size of the page by about 30 or 40%, over Ruby or PHP or ASP.NET. So it's an awesome innovation. I don't know why we didn't do it back when we first did MVC.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. The thing is funny about all of these things. It's like, I don't know why we didn't do this before. Well, you need a lot of underlying technology in order to stand on top of this stuff that's going on. And there's a lot of other cool stuff that we're going to be standing on top of, like that. The Ryujit is going to be a part of this whole process as well.
Yeah, and Roslyn too. Don't forget that.
Yeah, well, the Roslyn in-memory compilation stuff is really interesting. Also, being able, if I understand correctly, we'll be able to turn on and off new and future features for C#. Like as features come in, you could bring down your own private builder Roslyn and try out C# ideas that are coming for C#6.
Or you could just modify the Roslyn compiler yourself and add your own features, which, if you remember, we did that on stage. Anders did that earlier in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. What are we forgetting? Oh, yeah, Visual Studio Community. That's happened.
Yeah, so I was going to say we haven't talked about Visual Studio Community, and that's basically Visual Studio Pro for free.
That's basically pretty. It stands for itself. Any word on whether it'll be a little bit easier to download? I had a couple people overseas who are on slow bandwidth who couldn't get the gig and a half, having a little trouble getting that down.
It's more than a gig and a half.
Or whatever it is. It's big.
It's big. So that is something we're trying to work towards in the next version of Visual Studio, the one that we released a preview for. So we also released a preview of Visual Studio 2015 last week, and that preview is the first public preview that has all the ASP.NET 5 features in it. It has the .NET Core 5 in it, but when we release the community version of Visual Studio 2015, the hope is we're going to go spend some more time and work on the installer to make it a little bit more granular. The problem today is, even if you uncheck everything, the base amount of stuff that comes down ends up being 5 or 6 gigs.
Yeah, and the thing is that it gives Visual, this is my opinion, it gives Visual Studio a bad name because people look at it and they're like, man, that thing's really big and there's a bunch of stuff in there you don't need. But it's really that there's just a bunch of stuff that never really gets used if you're not doing this kind of dev or that kind of dev. So it seems like we need to pare down the core to its absolute minimum, a couple hundred megs, and then add on like web. So if I'm only a web person, I'd want to, like Office, you know how you install Office and it's kind of all there, but not, like I just have Word until it sees that I use Excel and then it brings Excel in.
Yeah, that's a great experience where you install Word, 45 seconds later it loads for the first time, and then as you start using features, it brings the features down on demand. That is something we've talked about for the last couple of years of doing in Visual Studio as well. What if Visual Studio just brought down the core, and as you try to open a web project, it goes and downloads and installs the web components. If you try to open a phone project, it goes and downloads the phone bits. That is something that I know they're looking at. I can't confirm whether they're going to do it or not, but getting better acquisition, smaller startup, faster startup is always, good.
Well, we have the technology. I've seen it in Word, so it's good to know that the possibility is there. But of course, it's all a matter of prioritization.
Well, sometimes it's also, I'll be honest, sometimes it's really hard just to tear this stuff apart. One of the things that, ASP.NET 5 in a lot of ways was us restarting our stack. And that's because things like System Web, we tried for years to move web forms out of System Web, and we found those things are so intertwined that they're hard to pull apart. If you look at the .NET Core framework that we have in .NET Core 5, the smallest, there's an assembly in there that I think's a couple megs, and it has the same problem. There's so many things that are so intertwined, it's hard to reduce the size of that thing, and that's the challenge on the installer. We have the tech to do it. It's just, can we untangle some of those things?
Yep, totally. Cool. I think that's a stand-up right there. What do you think?
That sounds good to me.
Cool. So as we said before, we're going to do these every week, except when someone's traveling. Right now we've been doing them on Tuesdays and alternating between morning and afternoon Pacific time. So that means this was 10 in the morning Pacific. The next one would be next week in the afternoon. We post all of our schedule as best as we can up at asp.net/vnext. Of course, when you do refer to asp.net vnext, remember that it is now asp.net 5. And all of these are up at the playlist, and you should really go back. Even though this was live, you want to look at the other ones. We talked about configuration system, we talked about diagnostics. You're going to get a real view into the internal of ASP.NET from the people who are in fact building it. Do like us on Facebook and on Twitter, and for both of you on Google+, we love you too. So we'll see you later. Bye-bye.